Video, I'm going to talk about the context model and basically starting from the AutoCAD file of the site plan, how to bring that in and then to generate a three-dimensional context model. So I would recommend a few things before you bring the file into Rhino. Before I get into those details, I did want to mention that for graphic scales, and there should be a graphic scale in all of your measured drawings. It's best to do these in the software where you've produced the drawing. So in this case, this one is in the AutoCAD file, and it basically is just going to represent, if I type in distance, the true dimensions of the structure, or of the drawing that you've created, right? So anyway, a couple of recommendations. For one thing, you can see there are different colors on the screen here because there are different layers, and it is helpful to have different layers for things like streets and sidewalks, trees, maybe buildings. There's some information on this particular drawing that would maybe not be relevant for yours. You probably don't have text and some of these other graphics. But generally speaking, you want to kind of categorize things like you would normally for any AutoCAD drawing. Okay, so what I would suggest you do, in addition to creating distinct layers so you can turn them on and off when you bring them into Rhino, is to complete some of these forms that will be extruded into three-dimensional shapes. So I'm going to set my current layer to the one that I've got in here called sidewalks. A sidewalk, and I am going to complete these shapes. So this is basically the area defined by the curb. So I'm going to fillet this, and then I'm going to join. So I've got two lines here representing the curve. Probably you only have one. Join, and then I'm going to go around and pick these. I would also, you'll notice that I have radii for those corners, and that is something I would also recommend that you do. Probably about 10 feet is adequate. So I'm going to go around and do the same process for all of these areas. I'm going to extend them out and also join them. So like for this one here, I'll draw a line from here to here, and then go around and join them. Okay, so I've completed that whole step of going around and creating these polylines, joined polylines of all of the areas that represent various properties. One other thing I would recommend that you do is, you'll see here there's a line that's called C prop line. I would add that in your AutoCAD file as a separate layer. Again, that's just the property that you've chosen to work from. So be sure to save this file before you import it into AutoCAD. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to open, before you import into Rhino, I'm going to save this, close it, open Rhino, and I'll show you how to import it. So I'm in Rhino now, and the first thing I'm going to do is to create a new file based on the template for large objects, feet, and inches. Then I'm going to save the file, and I will call it, I'm going to overwrite this other one that I created. It's going to be called Christine Marriott Context Model. And now what I'm going to do is import the site. So here it is, say open, and I'm going to do this once, and then I'm going to take a measurement, and then I'm going to have to redo it. And I'll just explain why. When I say okay here, and then I go to zoom extents, type in zoom and use the extents option. It came in and it brought this file in at a really large scale, 1,299 feet. So what do I need to do? I need to re-import it, but change the units. So I'm going to Control Z. So I'm undoing the import. And I'm now going to import it and change the units, not to miles. That would be not a good idea. I'm going to change them to inches, okay, and bring it in again. Right, and I'll go up to that perspective view, type in zoom extents, and I'll just check another dimension that I'm pretty sure about, 103 feet. So now I know that it's been brought into scale. Okay, so, and you can go around to all of these and zoom extents, so you can see the full site on all of them. Some of these layers, you know, you're not going to have them in yours. You could also, if you have some that you don't need to be looking at, you can always turn them off the same way you would in AutoCAD. All right, the first thing that we're going to do is start working on the base. So we'll start off with drawing a rectangle on a new layer. I'm going to click on new layer and type in base. And I'm going to double click on that so the check mark appears, and that will be my current layer. Then I'm going to go to the rectangle tool and make a rectangle around the whole site. After that, I'm going to extrude that so that I can create a giant box that the whole context is going to sit on. Okay, so extrude, and this is going to be an extrude curve because rectangles in Rhino are considered curves. Press enter. And I'm going to give it the depth of like 10 feet. The distance really doesn't matter. We're just really looking for a surface onto which to build upon. Okay. Now, if you change this from wireframe to ghosted or rendered or shaded, you're going to notice that there's no top and bottom to this. It's just a surface that wraps around the whole larger context. In order to put a top and a bottom, I use the command called cap. So type in cap, pick the new surface, press enter. I'm going to zoom into the corner here. So this is going to represent the surface is going to be the level at the top of the streets. And I want it to be below where the site is by maybe a foot. Okay, that's maybe a little bit deep for a curb. Usually a curb would be more like about 8 inches or so. I'm going to select the object that I want to, or actually, let's do this first. Let's create a little reference line here. All right, so you can see it. So I can make sure that it actually did move it. And I'm going to move the whole thing down 1 foot. Move, pick it, enter. Use a reference point, preferably one that doesn't touch anything, and that's in either the front or right view. So I'll click right here, 1 foot, and then confirm which direction I want to move it. Okay, now I can get rid of this line. All right, so next step is to create 3-dimensional forms out of these areas defined by the curves, not curve with a V, but curve with a B. So I will be picking those polylines that I had created in AutoCAD, and I will use the extrude curve commands to bring it down 1 foot, confirm the point, right? And same thing, I need to cap it. So I'll click on it, extrusion, and type in cap. And so there will be this slightly raised portion. You want to do the same thing to all of these raised curve areas in your site. So extrude curve, and you should be able to select all of them at the same time if you can isolate them. So here I've selected 4 of them, and I'll tell it 1 foot And a little closer and make sure I cap all of them. Cap. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have one more to cap over here in the corner. Now, I think to better see what I'll be doing for the next one, I'm going to start to turn off some of the layers that I don't need. So I have a layer for the sidewalks and for the trees. There's a hatch layer, and a bunch of other layers. Okay, it's turned off a bunch of them. I'm going to make a new layer called buildings. And I'm also going to make that the current layer. I can change the color too. Doesn't really matter what the color is, but something maybe that distinguishes it from other things would be good. And that's the current one. I'm also going to turn off the base. All right, now there's a bunch of boxes here that I don't need. This one here is my property line, and that will not become extruded, but the other objects here are buildings. So the same way that I joined parts of the site in AutoCAD, I'm going to use that same command here in Rhino, and I'm going to join some of these so that I can extrude them all together. Some of them I've already got definitions, so maybe I won't need to, but if you constructed them out of lines in AutoCAD, all you need to do is join them so that you can then extrude them as surfaces. So here we go, extrude curve. Now, one thing you're going to need to do before you do this part of the extrusion is you're going to have to estimate how tall all of the buildings are. I happen to know that this one here is about 15, and this one here is maybe a 4-story building. I would estimate 10 feet per story. Sometimes the ground floor may be a little bit taller, especially if it's retail. So maybe the ground floor is 12 to 15. But again, you do your best to judge from your photographs what the heights of the buildings around are. And 1 story, 10 feet, plus or minus. So I'll do this one right here, extrude curve. Pick the curve and press enter and extrude it up 15 feet, cap it. Okay, so you'll go around and do that for all of the buildings that appear on your site. I've gone ahead and done the extrusion for those 4 blocks. Your sites very likely have many more of these, but generally this should give you the idea of what to produce for the buildings. Now, I can go back and start to turn on some of the other layers, like my base layer, and see how the model will sit on it. Okay. Other things that you may want to build, things like trees. Now, we don't have the same kind of tree library that you might have in software like Revit. So I would suggest that you use some kind of simple abstraction to represent the trees, perhaps a cylinder with a sphere sitting on top of it, for example. So I will construct one of those in place of one of the trees that's on this site. I'll go to the solid tools, and before I do that, let's create a layer. I'm just going to call it trees. And I'll come over to the primitives. From the center of the circle that I had drawn, I'll change the radius to the, say, 1 foot, and the end of the cylinder, I'll give that a height using maybe, let's say, 20 feet. Okay. Fortunately, it kind of is aligning with the top one of my buildings, so it's a little hard to see. I noticed I put it on the wrong layer, so I can click on it, go to properties, and change it to the layer that I created called tree. And go back to the layer tool. Maybe I'll give it a different color so it stands out a little bit. Okay, and then on top of that, perhaps make some kind of sphere. So using the same primitives, the sphere tool. Before I do that, let's check that the diameter or the radius, about a 20-foot radius. So I will temporarily place it at the center of the top of the cylinder. Type in CEN, so we force it to go to the center. And then I'm going to put in a radius of 20 feet. Change that back to the tree layer. And I'll move it with the gumball. Just eyeball it. You can also move it by clicking on the arrowhead and 20 feet. Somehow I managed to move it. Let's shift it down a little bit. All right, now this layer could be made transparent so that it's reading a little bit more like something where light is passing through it too. I noticed it wasn't centered properly on there, so I've just shifted it so it's sitting on top of the cylinder. And I could make two more for these for this context model. You're of course welcome to generate your own sort of tree graphic. It could be created out of a series of lines in 3D or some other combination of solid primitives or something. Up to you. Okay. So go ahead and make whatever changes you would like for the graphics. For the purposes of the assignment, what I need you to do is make some screenshots. One screenshot should be the objects from above, and you can use the wireframe, maybe would be best for that one. And also a couple of screenshots maybe from opposite corners. So maybe one screenshot from this direction and then another screenshot from the opposite direction. I would suggest some kind of aerial view. In the next exercises, we'll start to place ourselves closer to the ground so you can kind of get a sense of what the site might feel like or look like from someone who's perhaps walking down the street.